Hello, souls and demons, and welcome back to the portal. Today's story is called My Evil Storyteller, written by Deeify. So just sit back, grip your seats, and enjoy. What have I done? I'm trying desperately to figure out where to start here. My name is not important. I'm sharing my most recent events with you as, I guess, a kind of warning. For the past year, I've run a YouTube and podcast channel. I have recently deleted it, so please don't try to find it or the content I had created. What my channel mainly consisted of was stories. Short horror stories created by its own fan base. I fell into it quite by accident, actually. I've always been into the spooky and unexplained, so I would often scour the internet for all things creepy. During a late-night internet binge, I stumbled across an interesting-looking video. Its thumbnail was simply a black and white security still from what looked to be a gas station or store. I've always been a sucker for odd things being caught on camera, so I didn't hesitate to click on the video. What I ended up getting was far different than what I expected. It was someone reciting a scary event that happened to them. At first I was disappointed, but wound up listening to the entire thing, entranced by the storyteller's voice as well as the crazy events that took place. I won't go into detail on the story, but it was quite intriguing. It left me with that certain creepy feeling that you get that is almost euphoric. I quickly clicked on the storyteller's channel and found another video with yet another scary encounter. Wait a minute. This guy is either a complete liar or he's held a very interesting life. Turns out, neither of those were the case. He was a storyteller. After a bit of research, I found there existed a subgenre of horror where short stories are read by narrators. The stories told were usually accompanied by creepy music and scary visuals to bring you in the right mood, and it worked. I was hooked. After listening to several different narrators tell some of the most amazing stories I'd ever listened to, I decided to take a crack at it. I mean, why not, right? I'm about to tell you one big reason why not. I quickly found telling these stories wasn't as easy as I first thought. I read through story after story in various places online, but found one particular social media platform ideal. It was littered with hundreds upon hundreds of these short horror stories, and I was thrilled. One setback I found was waiting for permission to use the original author's story. Sometimes it would be weeks before they got back to me. Sometimes they would respond immediately. Either way, I was starting to develop content. My first video was posted. I eagerly awaited the view counts the next morning as I woke up. 0 views. Ouch. Maybe the story wasn't good enough? I continued on though, releasing several more stories. After some time, I found my stories were being viewed. Usually only 1 or 2. One particular video even made it to 13 views. I was starting to see how this worked, and I was going to have to put in a good amount of work to get anywhere here. This was my original assumption until the message. I woke one particular morning and, in my normal habit, I grabbed my phone and groggily began clearing my notifications. One particular notification stood out. It was the icon for the website I pulled my stories from. Someone must be getting back to me about using their story. This was not the case, however. It was a message from an author, but he was coming to me to narrate a story. Hey, I caught your narration channel and listened to a few of your stories. You have a great voice for storytelling. If I send you my story, would you be kind enough to read it if you think it's good? The author wrote. I grinned at my phone, knowing I may have reached a new point in my storytelling career. It had been quite a grind these past 3 months, with only being able to bring my subscriber count to 49. This was a breath of fresh air. Trying to not sound too excited, I replied, "Sure. I'd be happy to check out your story, and if it fits the theme of my channel, I'd be honored to narrate it." I wrote back quickly, going back and forth, cleaning up my typos. I sent him my email address and asked him to submit it there. Within seconds of sending it, I had an email notification. That was quick. He must be really excited to have his story read. I decided to get my first cup of coffee in before I began reading the story. Once fully awake, I opened my email and began reading. It was good. No, actually, it was great. This may have been the best story I've read in my entire 3 months of narrating. For reasons you'll see later, I will not be going into any details of this author's stories, not even the name, but I can tell you, I really enjoyed reading his work. I had 2 other videos primed and ready to go, but I wanted this one out first. I made time to record my narration, edit the video together, and post it ASAP. I even posted a couple of hours earlier than I usually do. I was so excited for it. Another day went by and I was ready to load up my next story when something caught my eye. 578. The number I was seeing on my monitor was almost gleaming at me like a treasure. My last video had 578 views. Yes! Apparently, many people equally enjoyed the amazing story that was sent in. Another number stared back at me with my mouth wide open, as if I'd just struck gold. 204. My subscriber count had risen overnight from a measly 49 to 204. I guess you could say I was on a bit of a high the rest of the day. Another 2 weeks went by and I continued to load more stories from various authors. I quickly entered back into my frustrated state as my view counts and subscribers came to almost a complete halt. I was still getting them, running anywhere from 10 to 20 views and maybe 1 subscriber each week if I was lucky. I guess I had my one-hit wonder and it was back to the grind. Another message popped up on my phone as I was changing for bed. My friend, I have another story for you that I think you'll like. I just sent it to your email, please enjoy. The message said from the same amazing author who helped me build my channel up, even though that's where it stayed. Absolutely, I wanted to say thank you for sending in your previous story. It was very well liked and my biggest video so far, I replied back, this time not trying to hide my excitement. A thought crossed my mind as I opened his email. I didn't know how he would ever be able to top his last story. I felt a wide grin across my face as I read on. The story was a bit longer, but even better than the first. I was entranced by the characters, the way I was brought into the setting, and the overall verbiage the author used made it such an easy read. This is great, I whispered to myself as I folded my arms on the desk, as if doing so was going to bring me into the story even more. I stayed up late to edit together another story from this talented author. I posted it and went to bed. To say I slept well would be an utter lie. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling with that same childish grin on my face. I laid there, thinking of the characters from the story, how good the scenes were, and that twist ending, wow. As I woke the next morning, I didn't even try to make it to my computer. I needed to know now. I checked my channel and my phone immediately. 2,056 subscribers. Whoa. I said to myself as I contemplated if this was a glitch. I checked and rechecked, it was not. Just in a few minutes I was staring at my phone. I had gained another 11 subscribers. My last video must have been a hit. The video, I yelled at myself as I quickly changed pages. 8,119 views. My arm dropped to the bed with my hand still tightly gripping the phone. I stared at my wall in disbelief. I've done it. I've made my channel a success. Throughout the rest of the year, I still submitted stories from various authors. Some authors continually put out great writings while others were a bit back and forth, but the author who helped me build my channel so quickly, his stories were getting better and better with every submission. At the point where I thought he couldn't top one story, he'd prove me wrong easily by the next. Why is this guy not filthy rich from his work? My channel continued to grow. With every story I put out, I would grow more and more, making it to 100,000 subscribers within 1 month. Notably, the spikes in views and subscribers were always on this author's work. I couldn't thank him enough when I replied to another submission. He wasn't gaining anything from this, but I was, or so I thought. A full year had passed, and I was at the height of my narration career. 2 freaking million subscribers eagerly anticipated my stories every day. My channel was amazingly popular. Dozens upon dozens of authors lined up for me to tell their stories. I tried to make myself available to my favorite authors, but I made 100% sure my actual favorite author was featured the day a story was submitted. He would send them in every 2 to 3 weeks without fail, each story one-upping the last until he stopped. 6 weeks went by with no word from my friend who helped me out so much. Was he done? As I shut my computer down for the night, I noticed a green blinking light on my phone. I had a notification. Lighting my face in the darkness of my powered-down room, I saw I had a message from the author. Did he have a new story for me? He'd all but stopped messaging me on the website and simply emailed them to me without a word. I read the message. I've seen your success this past cycle. Congratulations. What do you say we finally meet in person? I'd like to see the face behind the voice, just as I'm sure you'd like to see the one behind the words. I reread the message several times with intrigue. He wanted to meet me and I wanted to meet him. I replied, "You know what? I think that's a great idea. You've helped me so much with your wonderful talent. I'd love to get to know you in person." As I went to turn off my phone screen, I noticed 3 dots waving at the bottom of the chat box. He was typing. I pulled my hand from the power button and eagerly awaited for the response. A new message popped up. "That's great. I actually have a little get-together planned with a few of my friends. They're all friends of your work. You would be the guest of honor." "Oh, wow. I'm honored, my friend. I'd love to come. When is it?" I typed hurriedly. "It's in 2 days. I think you're going to have fun and see how much your work has inspired my friends." He replied back in a speed I was unsure how he could type that fast. 2 days? I really don't know if I can. I stopped typing and immediately erased my message. "You know what? I'll be there," I replied quickly with a smile. Now, I'm going to stop telling the exact conversation here for a moment because then I asked him where his get-together was at. It was in a whole other state. Not only that, it was across the country. "I really don't think I can make it, buddy. I don't really have the money or time to make a trip like that," I replied, my smile turning into a frown. I stared at the same 3 dots waving about at the bottom of the screen. "Check your mailbox," the message simply stated. A quick glance into my email showed no new messages. After a brief moment of confusion, I realized what he meant. My real mailbox. As I pulled the mail from the mailbox, sorting through all of the useless ads and bills, I spotted an unusual letter. It was an off-white color with what appeared to be a seal over the envelope to keep it closed. The seal was a bit unusual. It was made in one of those old-timey wax seals with a design pressed down in the middle. My author friend may be older than I thought if he's still sealing envelopes like this. I furrowed my brow as I looked at the insignia that was stamped down on the seal. It was a hollowed-out circle with what appeared to be some strange language bordering the entire circle. Inside the circle was a form. It almost seemed like it was an attempt at a human form, but not human. The almost stick figure-looking design had no face. Its head was an upside-down triangle with another empty triangle inside of that, representing the blank face. Its arms were raised up but contorted back in on themselves with elbows raised straight up. Its legs stuck straight out as if the form was floating with 2 circles for feet. It was indeed strange, but maybe this was normal artwork back in the old days. I quickly opened the letter as I plopped the rest of my mail on the kitchen table. Inside was 2 plane tickets and a note. The tickets were for a flight from my town to where the author said he lived. He had already planned this before even talking to me. My eyes drew close to the note. Door 4 was all that was read. The next couple of days were stressful. I didn't know what to expect, but I still wanted to make the trip and meet my friend who helped me so much. I didn't post any videos in those 2 days. I tried to make more recordings, but my nerves got the best of me and I gave up fairly quickly. I stepped off of the plane with my bag slung over my shoulder. I let out a heavy exhale as I looked down at the note. Door 4 was the only thing on the page, but I must have read it a dozen times by now. As I exited the main area of the unfamiliar airport, several automatic glass doors were opening and closing, letting people in and out of the airport. All of them had large white numbers. I could see 7, 8, 9, and 10. Well, I knew which direction to go. As I approached door 4, I stopped in my tracks for a brief bout of hesitation. The sun beamed through the glass, signifying dawn was quickly approaching. I exited the building and was caught off guard by an unexpected sight. A long black limousine was parked with a well-dressed man in a suit holding a sign with my name on it. I made my greetings and we were off to meet my author friend. Thoughts spun in my head about who this person was. He's clearly well off. Was he actually a famous author and decided to make stories just for me to entertain himself? That's way too far-fetched. Either way, the anticipation built more and more as we rode on. The trip was longer than expected. Nighttime had hit by the time we'd made it. An old Victorian-style house appeared through the darkened trees. The night sky was eerily devoid of stars as we approached the large home. As we parked in front of the mansion, I was caught off guard by yet another unexpected sight. Dozens of people were walking from the front door of the house in a single file line. Whoa, what is this all about? I whispered to myself as I shut the limo door. I watched for several seconds as more and more people walked out of the home, all never lifting their heads as they stared at the ground. Their eyes glossed as they continued their slow trek forward. A strong feeling of dread coursed through me as I realized something was not right. I made an awkward throaty gurgle as I jumped at someone touching my shoulder. It was the limo driver. He didn't say a word as he too stared at the ground. His other hand lifted up as I slowly turned away in concern. He was handing me a piece of paper. "Join us," is all it said. "No, this isn't right. I'm leaving now," I said, raising my voice with each word. The driver didn't acknowledge my plea and joined the line of people lazily walking in one direction. I was done. The sights I was seeing was beyond abnormal. I ran in the opposite direction to get away from this cult, is the only word that sprung to my mind. I ran for several seconds, but was stopped by an ominous view. I grasped the closest tree branch I could as I was looking out over a dark, vast valley of forest. I was a long way from civilization. There was only one thing to do. I began back in the direction of the old mansion. I stared, frightened at what I was seeing. More and more people were walking out of the house. Walking isn't even the right word. They were shuffling, slowly yet in sync. I had to do something. I couldn't wander aimlessly in a dark forest hoping to come across something. These people paid no mind to me before. I don't think they will now. I walked at a brisk pace towards the house. I was relieved to find I was correct as I entered the house. None of the people even acknowledged my presence, even when I bumped shoulders with a few of them trying to get into the door. The house was dark and only lit by candlelight. If I was in a better state of mind, I would have been in awe of the obviously old trinkets and antiques littered across the house, all in pristine condition, although creepy in the flicker of the candles. There had to be a phone somewhere in this house. It's old, but it can't be that old. I was wrong. After shuffling through room after room, no phone, no computer, no access to the outside world. I began turning, more agitated as I opened drawers and old chests, hoping to find something to help me communicate to the outside world. I was stopped in my search as I caught a glimpse outside. Hundreds more people filled the mansion's courtyard. They were all swaying back and forth with heads lowered. They were seemingly waiting their turn to join the line as their heads wobbled back and forth. I let out a shiver as a cold chill ran up my spine. This isn't happening. My noisy venture through the house was becoming more noticed. The people walking in a straight line began changing directions. My direction. Their heads still hung low as they walked in from the hallway. The room began filling with the shuffling sounds of them as I began to panic. I let out a high-pitched yelp and began charging through them. They didn't ignore me this time. The grasps of them attempting to hold me down there were so strong. They appeared so weak as they walked, but now had an unimaginable strength as they held me. A searing pain was felt as a piece of cloth was strewn around my mouth, pulling my head back. I could feel the sides of my mouth tearing as I let out a muffled scream. I relented to them and fell to my knees. Effortlessly, they lifted me up and continued their slow, plodding journey to my unknown. I clenched my eyes as the pain of their grasps were almost too much to handle. My vision began to blur as I almost passed out from the pain. Suddenly, the pain lightened up. As I opened my eyes at the relief I felt, I gained a sense of weightlessness briefly as I was dropped to the ground. I didn't wait to acknowledge my surroundings. I began to crawl away on all fours with haste as I pulled the cloth from the newly formed divots on either side of my mouth. Blood poured from them as I removed it. More strong grasps were felt as the people began grabbing at me once more. "Stop it, damn you, stop!" I yelled in the most intimidating voice I could muster up. They stopped. All of them simply ceased their assault and stood up straight. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of emotion in their faces. It was subtle, but there. Their heads raised from their formerly lazy droops as they stared at me. Several silent seconds passed as I jolted back at the grasp of one of them. It wasn't the strong, violent grab from before. He gently lifted me to my feet and outstretched his hand forward as if to say, "This way." I panned the crowd around me as I realized where we were. The darkness around us echoed with water drips in the silence as I found myself staring at the large cave walls. "What is going on?" I said, putting my hands up in defense. A loud gasp was heard from the crowd. What was this? Why can't I get through to these people? "Please let me go. I won't tell anyone," I pleaded as I felt a tear roll down my cheek. Another grouping of gasps was heard, as well as low murmurs on each side of me. Several of them almost mustered a smile. As if instinctual, the people began walking again, simultaneously. I felt a hand on my back as if to guide me with them. I gave in. What else could I do? I walked with them. The cave seemed darker than ever as we approached a particularly narrow tunnel. I conformed to the single-file line as we entered. A much larger area awaited us. Candlelit walls flickered across the large room as the sight of hundreds upon hundreds more people appeared. All silent, all staring at me. I stopped, quietly staring back as the people behind me walked around me on either side to enter. I opened my mouth to yell out to anyone who could understand me. I was interrupted. "My friend, welcome. I can't tell you how much it means to me, to us, to have you here." A deeply growled voice echoed from the cavernous walls. I couldn't find the source of the voice, but it was the only intelligible person I've heard since arriving. "Who are you? Let me out of here now!" I yelled as my voice echoed into the darkness. Suddenly, a grouping of people started to part. A strange, hooded person began to appear in the crowd. His purple robes flowed as he walked. I assumed this was the leader of this cult. I began walking towards him as everyone parted from me as well. As we approached the middle of the enormous cavern, I was met with the sight of a large man. I peered up at him, trying to get a glimpse of his face through the hood. "Thank you for all you've done for us. I wanted to meet you face to face to show you my appreciation. our appreciation," he remarked in a much lower, deep, growled voice. I moved to speak yet again, but was interrupted. He slowly lifted his hand to reveal a large, dark gray and green hand. He lifted one finger showing a long, black, talon-like fingernail. As his hand approached his face, he lifted his head up to show a dark-colored, rigid face, with a short, pointy nose pointed downward. A smile came across his face, showing jagged teeth pointing in all directions. Streams of saliva connected his top and bottom teeth as his mouth opened. "Shh," he whispered as he put his long finger to his mouth. That's when I noticed his eyes. They were large, bloodshot eyes bulging out of the sockets. He had no eyelids. His eyes seemed impossibly large as he stared at me with his psychotic grin. I stood, frozen in terror. As he put his large hand on my shoulder to lead me in the direction he just came from, he began to speak. "You have done more for me than read my little stories, my friend. You see, the human mind is surprisingly easy to manipulate. Certain phrases, certain word combinations can allow the mind to be accessed, much like your little computers. That little computer, though, allowed me to reach you. I knew you had the talent to draw in the amount of people I needed. This is why I messaged you." I stared forward in disbelief at what I was hearing as we continued our walk. Those that were susceptible to my words knew what to do, and here they are, he continued, letting out a laugh. We stopped walking as he peered down, beckoning me to join him in what he was looking at. An old, beat-up laptop computer lay in a flat slab of rock. To the right of it, stacks of paper full of words were strewn around with an old ink pen laying across them. I recognized the writing. It was his stories. His stories I broadcast to the world. "We must go now. Take this with you," he said as he offered me a sheet of paper. I didn't speak. I simply watched as he walked to the front of the crowd of people who were all staring forward, no longer moving. The author lifted his hands up on either side as a rumble was felt beneath my feet. I was the only one to react as I ducked down to keep balance. The dark cave was slowly lit up by a bright light. I shielded my eyes as I looked up to the side of the entire cavern wall lit up in a green, smoky mist. Like a moth to the flame, everyone began slowly lurking towards the lit up wall. One by one, they disappeared into that wall. The author turned to look at me as he lowered his hands, putting one finger up to his lips as if to say, "Shh." One more time, he began walking with the people. I watched as he too disappeared into the mist. A good hour must have gone by as I stood, frozen, watching the hundreds of poor souls follow that creature into the unknown. I looked down at the laptop. In a rage, I grabbed it and smashed it to pieces on the stone slab. No one paid much attention as the last few of them walked into the mist. I quickly left as the cavern fell eerily silent. The darkness began to take over as this sort of portal closed. As I made my way out, the friendly sight of stars had returned, paired with a brightly lit moon. I gazed at the piece of paper the author handed me. It was a notarized letter. I read through in disbelief. He left the giant mansion to me and everything inside, which included an old, pristine, vintage car, keys still inside. I didn't care if I damaged it though. I drove it back to town and with a second ticket flew home. I never returned to that place, nor told anyone about the mansion that was left to me. This is the first time I've let this story out. Only reason being is, these short horror stories are becoming more and more popular. I only ask you to be careful. Storytellers and listeners alike, Know where your stories are coming from, and if the stories are a little too good, maybe look the other way.